acknowledging that you're not worthy, but that you always have to try to be worthy.
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn Dolske.
And I'm Rudy Salo.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates. All in the effort to live a better life, a healthier life, a more knowledgeable life. Rudy, every time you're ruminating on my intro.
You know what? Yeah, I'm ruminating because there's that awkward pause. And then at the same time, I would like to add a little something tonight. How about a worthy life, Gwen? What does that mean?
Worthy life.
Life
that's perfect. Nicely done, Rudy. That fits in perfect.
Why? Why is that perfect?
It's perfect because our guest, third-time guest, philosophy professor, who's written about Batman, who's written about Captain America, and now we're interviewing him about Thor. He applies philosophy to these characters to, let's say, unpack the morality. But this time with Thor, what is really interesting is that it's not necessarily a moral question, but it is a psychological question about what constitutes worthiness and self-growth and self-understanding. So this episode, you are right, Rudy. This one is about worthiness, a worthy life.
Something I struggle with frequently of whether or not I am worthy. And actually, I have a couple of, I would say, realizations during this episode. So basically, I've realized that, like, even though I'm not an alien, and we discuss again my fear of aliens, I am a lot like Thor. And that's actually explained during this episode.
You know, since we recorded this a couple of weeks ago, I have been thinking about this episode nonstop.
Wait, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. You totally ignored the fact that I said I'm like Thor.
You're like Thor.
Almost as if that you just, was that, I didn't mean I was like Chris Hemsworth. I don't have that body. I just meant, do you just totally ignore that?
Sometimes it's not that I ignored it. It's just that sometimes when you say something obvious, is there really a reason to add to it? Right?
Oh, you're good. You should be a lawyer. That was very good.
Well, Mark we love having Mark on the show. He does, one of the things that I like about him, and we say this in the episode, one of our jobs in education and academia is not only to go through philosophy and philosophical texts, but when it comes to teaching, that we use the tools of philosophy in order to examine things and make life more enjoyable. And he does that so beautifully. And that's one of the reasons why his books are such a success. We recommend them to everyone. His episode on the morality of Batman is one of our top 10 episodes. We're 100 episodes in. And yeah, he does that. And he also has a great Twitter. We're going to link all of his information in the show notes. Every time we have him on, we learn something new. We have a window into understanding these things like Marvel Comics in a brand new light. A philosophical light, a psychological light.
It's true. You know, there are some people out there that complain that the MCU has taken over film and everything's about comic books and everything's about that. I say, if you listen to these episodes and you read Mark's books, there's a reason why comic books have taken over the film world, because there's a lot to learn from it. Mark's one of my favorite guests. You know, look, we've had a lot of great guests. We've had a lot of repeat guests, but when Mark comes on, I get very excited. I nerd out, and I'm a former comic book collector. I still have them. I'm excited, and I hope people really enjoy this episode and realize that I am like Thor. I can't wait for people to.
That's the takeaway.
I want #Rudy is Thor. I would love to see that trend. Can anybody maybe do that? I will.
Listeners, please make that happen for Rudy. Okay, and in preparation for your last couple of weeks, have you been doing what I have been doing and doing the Magic Mind 14-day challenge?
I have been, and it's made me there's like my normal Thor self, and then Magic Mind made me super Thor. I had two hammers. Yes, I have been. It's been terrific.
Yeah, it's a great shot. So I finished my 14 days. I am totally logging on to get more. For any of our listeners who want this is a great shot to take. You can take it with your coffee. You can take it instead of your coffee. But it is an elixir, I'm going to call it, that helps you focus, de-stress. It's perfect for before you start to sit down with your work. Magic Mind, and the discount code is details14, and we're going to link it in the show notes so that you can get 20% off of your order. Rudy, are you going to add anything? Rudy?
#Rudy is Thor.
Okay, and let's talk worthiness with Mark D. White. Mark, welcome back. Third time on the pod.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so excited. This time we're talking about Thor, and I confess I'm definitely going to be learning something that I didn't know for this, because I had to read up on who Thor was. So something that I really love about your books is that, and by the way, your Morality of Batman, that's still one of our top episodes. Everyone just loves it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific.
And what I like about what you're doing is that, I mean, and you must get this too, being in philosophy, that somebody will be like, oh, philosophy, there's like no right answer, or what are you going to do with that? And what's really lovely that you have shown us with your books on superheroes, and now we'll talk about Thor, is that philosophy helps us enjoy our lives more and be more thoughtful about the things that we enjoy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I've spoken before about, getting my start doing this with the Blackwell Philosophy and Pop Culture series launched by William Irwin. And that's really his main idea, was to introduce philosophy in a more customer-friendly way, to show people that even the shows and comics and movies that they love all, evoke some philosophical topics.
Yeah.
Just like we all do in class. Just like, we'll say, oh, did anyone see that movie? Remember when that character said that? Doesn't that remind you of what Aristotle said about wisdom? Blah, blah, blah. And, teachers in every topic have been doing that throughout time. So it's just doing that in book form.
But most importantly, philosophy helps us frustrate Rudy.
I knew it was coming. I knew you two were going to start picking on me, and that's fine. Okay, the way we started off this conversation was I was giving accolades to Mark once again on a terrific book. It is I don't want to call it a departure, Mark. You'll talk more about why this book is different than your Virtues of Captain America book and the Morality of Batman. But in the introduction, you read the introduction of this book alone, and it sets it apart from the others. So I'm just going to ask the question, besides being a comic book genius, why did you write this book, and why did you take this tactic with this book and address psychology versus how you normally do ethics and otherwise? Why is this one different?
The book was really motivated by a couple things. One was when the fourth Thor movie was announced, and it was made clear at the New York Comic Con announcement. I was actually at Comic Con that year, but I wasn't in the hall where they made the big announcement. But when the director brought Natalie Portman out and she held up the hammer, and it was clear that they were going to make Jane Foster Thor in the fourth Thor movie, and that storyline was just wrapping up in the comics, and I just loved it. I loved that they gave the hammer to the woman who originally began as Thor's human love interest and perpetual damsel in distress. That they elevated her to they'd been elevating her for years, making her a doctor and helping the hero community, making her finally Thor, the actual character Thor, was quite a development. And the fact that they were going to reflect that in the movie so soon after it happened in the comics was wonderful. And I immediately contacted my publisher at Occam Publishing, and said, I'd love to do a book to capitalize on this, and he thought it was a great idea too. But discussing that storyline, I knew wasn't going to be my typical, what ethical school does this character represent, such as I'd done with Batman and Captain America. So I had to think about what is really the heart of this story, and the heart of the story more with the Odinson, or what we call the original Thor, once he loses his hammer and loses his identity, is the struggle with worth and worthiness. And that's always been one of the hearts of the Thor mythology, is this inscription on the hammer that said, he, she, they who can wield the hammer will have the power of Thor. Who's worthy to lift the hammer will have the power of Thor. So the whole thing really centers around worth, and the writer of all these Thor stories focused on the Odinson losing his worthiness and Jane picking up the hammer. Jason Aaron, brilliant writer, worked with a lot of artists, but he wrote the entire run. And he was very clear in all of his interviews and his newsletters and his commentaries at the end of the issues and the letters columns and such, that he was really exploring what it meant to be worthy, what it meant for a god to be worthy, what it meant to lose your feeling of worthiness and get it back. And so I was really just tracing through what Jason Aaron and all his artists laid out in the comics, and sprinkling little bits of philosophical insight when I could. But that was really a departure for me because before, like I said, I'd just gone through characters and said, oh, this one's a deontologist, this one's a utilitarian, this one's a virtue ethicist. And there's not really that much of that to do with Thor because, ethically speaking, he's not that rich a character. But, it's much more in the psychology, which I could approach through a little bit of existentialism and try to see what it's like for you to lose the anchor of your identity and the anchor of your feelings of self-worth and have to get them back and realize that worthiness is not exactly what you thought it was or what you were told it was.
What were your conclusions about this notion of worthiness? And I'm thinking about it because we just in one of my classes talked about the apology and when Socrates describes what a man of worth is. And then a man of worth is somebody who thinks about what is right and wrong and what is just before action, as opposed to a man of little worth thinks about, and I'm not being gender friendly intentionally because he wasn't, but I always have to remind my students that, but but a person of little worth is somebody who thinks about their body, life or death before they act. And I noticed that you do go back to virtue ethics when it comes to this notion of worthiness and a bit of existentialism. But what were your conclusions? Like, what does it mean to have worth, to be worthy?
Well, I don't make a sort of universalist statement because it's very personal to Thor, the idea of worthiness that he arrives at. Originally, and it was very hard actually going through the original comics to find exactly what worthiness meant. The original writers didn't spend a lot of time on it. In fact, until Jason Aaron, no one had spent much time on it at all. We just get some vague concepts of bravery and valor. It was actually the original telling of the story of how he first picked up the hammer as a young man that they settled on, I think it was 3 criteria for worthiness. Just, selflessness, which is kind of what you just mentioned in terms of Socrates. Sacrifice, which is basically heroism. And the most interesting part to me was that you had to do so without thinking about it at all. So it had to be automatic. It had to be intrinsic to you to do this. In other words, you didn't really consider it. You didn't weigh the costs and the benefits. You didn't think about the implications for yourself. You just did the right thing automatically. Doing without thinking, which I naturally tie into one of my favorite Taoist concepts, Wei, acting without acting. And that really continues through the book because there's that concept is echoed through later versions of what it means for Thor to be worthy. But the answer he comes to at the end is really that worthiness comes through really 2 things. One, acknowledging that you're not worthy, but that you always have to try to be worthy. Again, another Eastern concept of it's the path, not the destination. It's the process. But he really realizes that it's not, being worthy to him and, of course, to the hammer, because the hammer ultimately judges whether he's worthy or not, which is another problem. But the idea is he can never be too satisfied with whether he's worthy or not. In other words, becoming worthy, he used to think of it as an accomplishment. And once he accomplished that and once he was able to lift the hammer, that was it. Mm-hmm. He didn't have to keep trying. And what he found out in the end was that he does have to keep trying. And the fact that he keeps trying to be worthy is actually what makes him worthy. Not what he actually does or however many acts of heroism he undergoes, but actually just, I think the terms they use are the struggle is what makes you worthy. Never being sure of yourself. And we see that in a lot of other heroes too, because I still write a lot about Captain America, and Captain America is never satisfied with what he does. He always thinks he could do better, always thinks he could save more people or save them more quickly or with less, damage to other people or things. And he's always hard on himself, and that's not particularly virtuous because he goes too hard on himself. But the idea that he always thinks he could do better, and here's a person who most people would judge as exemplary, and he shouldn't have to feel he has to do better, but he still wants to.
Do you think that superhero films in general rely on virtue theory?
I think they do because I think that's easier to represent on screen. Just, focusing on core heroic character traits such as courage and selflessness. It's more unusual for films to get into issues of, consequentialism versus deontology. You find that in like the Civil War movie with Iron Man and Captain America debating over the Sokovia Accords and whether they should do the right thing or try to just maintain the peace. But, usually I think it's just easier to show, a hero, sacrificing themselves or risking their lives to save others.
So if we were going to, and like I said, I'm not as familiar with Thor, but if we were to say, I mean, what does the hammer represent? What is every person's hammer? Does every person have a hammer?
That's a great question.
Oh, thank
you. Thor's problem with the hammer, originally the hammer was just his father's way of testing him. And the hammer was meant to represent his father, Odin, the All-Father. It was meant to represent his father's judgment. So, in Thor having to struggle to be worthy to lift the hammer, he was really, struggling to prove himself worthy to his father. And then in Jason Aaron's run, though, he made the hammer sentient in itself. So now you had to please the hammer, and Odin couldn't even lift it. So it was clear that the hammer took its own role in terms of determining the worthiness of who was going to wield it. But the problem was still the same in that Thor was really living up to somebody else's idea of worthiness rather than his own. And that's where I bring in two concepts I think are mirror images of each other, the Kantian sense of autonomy, determining your own will, and then the existentialist idea of authenticity, creating the person you want to be or you think you should be, rather than letting external influences or other people determine who you are. And that's basically what Thor does when he cedes all the responsibility for his actions and his identity and his worthiness to this hammer, or through the hammer to his father. So if I would say, does everyone have their hammer? I think anyone that looks to an external source for validation, whether that's a parent or some other authority figure or a peer group or, Rudy. I look to Rudy to see what I should do and what kind of person I should be. I think everyone does.
Same.
Everyone should.
It's actually interesting. I actually kind of identify a lot with Thor, not because of the way he looks, and not necessarily because of his arrogance. It's actually because of his hair.
His hair.
And then there are his impatience. I guess I should have realized in watching the movies. I'll admit, I wasn't a huge Thor comic guy growing up. I was way more of a Batman, Captain America person. But I didn't know that impatience was one of his quote unquote vices. And as I was reading that in the book, I thought about myself, about how I was very impatient recently in a scenario. But then you also go on in the book about, you're talking about everything needs to kind of be in the middle of moderation. Like, you can't be too little, you can't be too courageous, because then you're kind of arrogant and you're putting yourself on the line. Foolhardy. Yeah. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, Mark, how does Thor strike the balance of his vices versus what it is for him to be worthy in order to carry the hammer? Like, what is it that he does personally? Does he talk to himself? Does he see a psychologist? What does he do?
I don't think he really worries about it.
Okay.
I would, if I ever try to describe Thor's ethical code, I use virtue ethics, but I would never say that he's great at it. I mean, okay. Captain America is kind of the paragon of virtue in that sense. But when Thor makes ethical decisions, he really just he lets his core character traits guide him. If there's a dangerous situation, he runs into it. If there's someone that needs saving, he'll do anything he has to save that person. He's not really making kind of algorithmic calculations, according to utilitarianism, or weighing out duties by deontology. He's just, he has a sense of what the right thing to do is, what the heroic thing to do is, what the courageous thing to do is, and he does it. And he's not striking that Aristotelian golden mean necessarily. He hasn't mastered that, and I don't think he really worries about that. He's not a character that's too concerned with his ethical behavior. He's pretty satisfied with that, to the extent that it sometimes borders on arrogance. Again, that kind of comes back to why this book was so different, because I wasn't mainly analyzing his ethical behavior and where it comes from. I took care of that in like half a page, because there really isn't that much. I mean, he's a hero. He's generally a good person and all. But he's not like Captain America or Batman or Iron Man in that he's, following a very specific moral code.
It's an important question, though. As you outline in your introduction how all of us will deal with this question of self-worth, and that's one of the values of the story is,
Well, what if we want to improve? I guess where I was trying to go with that was there was a line in the first chapter. You were talking about the fact that Thor doesn't have to think about risking his life to save Sif or Frasier, shows that in doing so, a reflection of who he has. This is the line. This is actually this is the line that I want to underline, Mark. A reflection of who he has become. See, I read become as, well, wait a minute, he wasn't quote unquote born that way. He had to work on himself to become that way. And so I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to work on my own self, and I guess I'm trying to take some lessons from Thor. Like, how can somebody become more ethical or virtuous, like if they wanted to work on themselves?
Well, I think we all have to do that. I mean, we all, to be good people, we have to do that, and that kind of gets to the end result of the book. To be good, it's, you don't become good and then that's just it, and you're good forever. You have to keep trying to be good and trying to be better. And I mentioned Captain America has always done this. Even though many people would consider him the perfect man or the perfect person, he's never satisfied with himself. He's always trying to do better. He's always trying to be better, always questioning himself. And, Kant said that about moral character, that if you're not constantly striving to improve it, it diminishes. Being good or being moral is an ongoing struggle, which is what Thor learns at the end, is to be worthy, is to be constantly trying to be worthy and testing your worth. Like when now he no longer assumes he can pick up the hammer whenever he wants to. He's always a little worried whenever he goes to pick it up that he might not be able to pick it up this time. And so he's always making sure he's trying to be the best person he is. But when you point to that line and you say he became worthy or he became good, that's because the early part of his life is really this. I don't know if I would really say it's moral development, because the whole idea is being guided to be able to pick up this hammer. I mean, he was trained from when he was a little boy that his entire goal in life was to be able to pick up this hammer. And so he wasn't really worried about abstract notions of ethics. He was really saying, well, what do I have to do to pick up this hammer? I've performed all these deeds. I've saved all these people. What more do I have to do? And there's several great panels in the comics history where he just, he gets done fighting a battle or saving people or defeating a monster or a frost giant. And he goes to try to pick up the hammer and he can't do it. And he says, how much more do I have to do? When am I finally going to be worthy? So, it's not until he finally gets to the point where he's got the three original pillars of worthiness, the selflessness, the sacrifice, and the unthinking action, where he finally hit the key to lifting the hammer. Then through most of his comics history, he was just assumed to be worthy forever. It was a sense that it was an accomplishment. He crossed the finish line. He was worthy. That was fine. He's going to be worthy forever. And it wasn't until this recent run in the comics that he finally had that taken away from him, and he had to learn what it was to reclaim it and get that new understanding of what worthiness is.
Got it. Now, yeah. Now I can see why when the announcement of Jane Foster becoming Thor, why that prompted you to analyze and led to this book. That makes a lot of sense because there was this assumption, right. Oh, well, Thor already crossed the finish line. He's already worthy. He is Thor. But much like human beings, we are always tested. We always need to work on ourselves to strive for betterhood. I completely get it. So I am like Thor, is what you're saying. Because I'm constantly working.
Yeah, that's what we've been saying the whole time.
Because I've been working out in my hair. Really? That's what you guys are talking about, correct? That's all.
I just didn't want to mention you in the book because I'd embarrass you.
Just wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing. Sorry, Gwen. Yes.
Well, that's what I there's. Oh no, I was going to say there's a famous line by John Stuart Mill where he says it is always better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And the fact that John Stuart Mill pointed to Socrates is, when you think about it, well, Socrates was perpetually dissatisfied because that's the nature of humility and curiosity. Right. So I'm guessing, because at any moment, if you're like, you know what, I know enough, I'm good, I'm done, then you've actually stopped that phase of humility and you pretend to have the same knowledge as divine knowledge, which is in and of itself problematic. So I'm guessing that this notion of worthiness that's why it's on a continuum. There is no finish line. Right. And the moment you think you have, then it's a problem.
And it's the process, it's undergoing the process constantly that actually makes you worthy. The fact that you keep trying, the fact that you never assume you're worthy and you keep trying to be worthy is actually what makes you worthy.
Wait a minute. So 20 years of therapy, years of everything. You guys literally just solved everything with like a couple of lines. The fact that I am never satisfied and I'm always dissatisfied actually makes me a worthy person because I'm always striving to be better. You guys just solved all my problems.
You're welcome.
Right.
That'll
Suck it,
be
Leon.
$350. Leon.
Yeah.
Shout out to Season Mother Podcast. That was our shout out.
What are you charging now?
I don't think that's the shout out that we were supposed to give.
That was good, Mark. That was very good. Thank you. I'm going to hang up now.
No, Rudy,
get my
stick
bill.
around. I have a question. I have a question for Mark that I'm wondering, Rudy, what you're going to think about this, because I think this is going to throw off your good Catholic school background. But there's a part in your book where you're saying that the superheroes just in general are like, godlike figures like our modern day mythology. And there is something from David Hume in his atheistic approach, which talked about problems with the existence of God. And he said one of the things is that human beings and all beings are made with just this economy of abilities. Like, why couldn't we have more things? Like, why can't I climb walls? Thank God my cat doesn't have opposable thumbs or language, but every single being has this economy of power. And so David Hume is saying, isn't that evidence that, if there was an all good God, why would they do that? So I have always thought that our superheroes are actually demonstrative of this idea that we are rejecting the idea of God and they're kind of human. In your book, you're saying that our creation of them is a type of godlike thing. Like, I think you took it in a different direction. So I'm just wondering, if you could expand on that these are our modern day mythologies or that they're godlike. I thought it was a rejection of the existence of God in a way. Like, you could do better, like an all powerful being would have done better. And we can imagine something
I don't
better.
think I was asking that question exactly. I mean, there is a lot in the book, because when Thor becomes unworthy, or when he's told he's unworthy, it's because this foe he's fighting in the first storyline of Jason Aaron's run, Gore the God Butcher, who was played by Christian Bale in the movie, he whispers in Thor's ear that all gods are unworthy. And that makes... Well, no, Gore says it, and then Nick Fury whispers it in his ear later. But anyway, when he hears this, he drops the hammer and he can't pick it up again. So it wasn't so much about, you, Thor, are unworthy, but all gods are unworthy. But in the end, it comes out to about the same thing. But that forced me to take a little detour in the book and discuss, in exactly what sense is Thor and the rest of the Asgardians and the Olympians, etc., in what sense are they gods? And actually, this was discussed a lot more in the earlier comics before Aaron than the concept of worthiness was, because there are a lot of very interesting stories where Thor would perform some miraculous feat, and usually a Catholic priest would see it. And when they had a chance to talk, the priest would say, "I'm shook. I mean, I've witnessed a miracle, and my God is supposed to do this. And if you can do this, are you a god? What about my God?" And I think this is a natural question to bring up in comics where you have someone that claims to be a god. So usually in these storylines, Thor will make very clear that no, I'm not a god like your God. I'm just a very powerful being, practically immortal, can do these things that seem miraculous to you, but I don't want worship. I just want to help people. And in the Marvel Universe, there's actually a very strict hierarchy of all these cosmic beings. I describe in the book, but it's laid out in several issues of the comics, where it's all the different scales of cosmic beings. Then at the top is the creator. And that's meant to be either, the God of Christianity or Islam or Judaism. In terms of, there's all these powerful cosmic beings in the Marvel Universe, some of whom call themselves gods. And I distinguish in the book between small g gods and big G gods. And Thor is always very careful. I mean, there's one storyline where he says, maybe I am a god, I'm going to take over, and he becomes a fascist and the whole world falls apart. Then he has to reverse time to get out of it. But usually he's very clear that, I'm just, people used to worship me. I'm not into that anymore. I just try to help people. And trying to delineate what makes this small g sense of God different from the truly theistic version of a god, I realized that, when you take out the worship and you take out the omnipotence and the omniscience, what do you have left? You have a superhero. So these small g gods of the Marvel Universe really are just superheroes. That Arthur C. Clarke line about, technology so advanced that it's indistinguishable from magic. There's several writers in the comics that have tried to make explicit that Asgardians are just aliens, just superpowered aliens like Kryptonians. But, that I think they want to keep some of the mystery. I think, in terms of Marvel comics in general, they want to keep some of the mystery, still be able to call them gods, but again, small g gods versus big G gods. So, I mean, I love your question, Gwen, but I think I really looked at it from the other direction, because there is something I talk about a lot where people say that superhero stories, given their popularity in the movies and the comics and TV shows, are our modern mythology. Not necessarily our religion, but in terms of, our core stories, we think of, Spider-Man getting bitten by the spider, Bruce Wayne's parents being killed, both adopting lives of heroism and saving people, and so many superheroes living with being orphans or having gone through great tragedy in their life and rising above it and helping other people, and that being a moral story in itself. Modern superheroes are our myths or our small g gods, and I was trying to come to it from the other direction and say the beings that are called gods in the Marvel Universe, when you realize all they're missing compared to big G theistic gods, are really just superheroes.
I liked Gwen's question as well, although I will. She called me out, Mark, because of the Catholic upbringing. I am. Yeah. It's terrible. It's terrible. I'm going to say I'm more like Father Koza from New York, the priest that you mentioned in the book, that he says he's shaken the actions and his presence undermine the people's faith in a higher divinity. And Mark, I'm going to hark back to another Good is in the Details episode that we talked about with Tracy Drain from NASA. I don't believe in aliens. The reason why I don't believe in aliens is because I believe in God. Because I believe in God. Because if there are aliens out there, then we are not special people. I'm more like the priest that's referenced in your book than I am like Gwen and Thor and these these evil people that are out there that do not believe in such things. And so I'm glad that you address the godhood in the book, because I don't think we as humanity could actually survive as a society if we knew there were aliens out there. I know this is not a podcast on aliens, but I have to defend myself because you do address this a little bit in your book. Would you like to speak to that at all, Mark, or you just want to ignore my craziness?
I address aliens in the book? I mean, other than as guardians?
No, you don't address the aliens. What you do address, though, is the priest struggling with the presence of Thor. His mere presence shakes their faith in their own god, which is exactly what I'm saying. If there were actually aliens, that would shake my faith in actual God, and that's why I personally choose not to believe in aliens. I know that doesn't make sense, but does that make sense?
I think the point of the story in the comics, though, is not the priest saying, Thor, you're an alien, so you shake my faith. He's saying, Thor, you perform all the acts I would associate with a god. You're all powerful, you save people, you fly, you say you're a god. He's well on record saying he's a god. And so I think it's the fact that there is a competing god to a priest who by his nature is monotheistic that shakes his faith. I didn't read it that way, at least, that he's saying because you're an alien, because certainly there's enough evidence of aliens in the Marvel Universe that Thor wouldn't be the first.
Wait, is there a religious pushback to these stories? I had never even thought about that. Do you know of any, like when Harry Potter was out and then there was this look at it that it was evil or demonic and some people are not allowed to read it? Is there any kind of a pushback from a religious community about these types of stories?
Besides from Rudy Salo.
Pathbreaker. Was what Gwen is. Yeah, besides.
Not that I know of. I mean, there's people that do, like Matthew Brake, that do theology, in relation to superheroes. And he
nothing like the Harry Potter reaction.
Not that I've heard of, because I mean, as far as I remember, that was just claims, witchcraft and satanic influences and everything, and the issues with.
That's why I don't read it. I don't read Harry Potter. It's true. My wife hates me for
so
it.
Good.
So it's because of the witchcraft. Demons shit scares the hell out of me. I don't even go to that stuff. I just don't even go there. What do you want me to do? What? You brought up Harry Potter.
There's all these moral stories in it, and so I'm thinking, if Harry Potter's off the table, then how is it that Thor is unscathed?
He's not unscathed. He's an alien.
Thor's not an alien. Is Thor an alien?
What are you talking about?
That's what I was talking about. Is a few writers in the Marvel Universe want to just, and in the movies the approach is he's an alien. In the movies, yeah.
For sure, in the movies. I'm sorry. Let me clarify. In the movies, he's definitely an alien. A damn good-looking alien with a ridiculously amazing, physique. But he's an alien.
I might have been. Okay, so virtue.
All right. Good. All right. Sorry, I'll be quiet.
We're professionals. All right. So virtue ethics tends to, and I think wrongly, I'm not agreeing with it, but it has tended to presuppose a masculine idea. And so I am just wondering for you, Mark, how do you think that that the comic handled having Jane in there? Like, how do you think that they handled having a woman with virtuous traits?
I think they did wonderfully. I mentioned earlier that Jane was just introduced as the love interest, the nurse fawning over Dr. Donald Blake, Thor's human form, in the early 60s. And then they kind of wrote her out of the storyline for a while, and they had Thor together with Sif, his fellow Asgardian, and then they actually married Jane Foster off to Dr. Keith Kincaid, who was actually the model Odin used when he created Donald Blake to be Thor's human form. Because when Thor was originally sent to Earth, he was sent to Earth because he was youthful and arrogant and impetuous, and Odin wanted to teach him humility. So he sent him to Earth in the form of a doctor who had an impaired leg, and he would be a surgeon, and he would learn how to help people and not be the mighty prince of Asgard anymore. But when Odin didn't just stick Thor's essence in some existing human being, he created Donald Blake to be this doctor, and he created Donald Blake based on this other man, Keith Kincaid. So they actually married Jane Foster off to Keith Kincaid, who was basically the original Don Blake. No one cares about that, but I just find that really interesting. Then later on, Keith Kincaid would become the Avengers' resident doctor. And no one ever mentioned this, or in the comics, no one ever mentions this or catches on to it, that, hey, you look like that Donald Blake guy. Then eventually, Jane, in the 90s, she goes through a lot of development behind the scenes, because she's still a fairly minor character in the Thor comics in the late 90s and 2000s. But we find out that she became a doctor. She's no longer a nurse. She's now a doctor. And she helps out the hero community when they need it, because obviously she still has ties to Thor and his friends. So they'd really been developing her and showing her virtues for years. So when she was given the hammer, it wasn't a big surprise. It wasn't a shock that they didn't take some, minor character that was mentioned in 2 issues 30 years ago and gave her the hammer. They gave a character that had been cultivated over the last decade or two to become a significant virtuous character in herself, and they gave her the hammer. Now, the question I tried to answer in the book, and I don't think I was able to because it wasn't clear in the source material, is why specifically does the hammer find her worthy? And, because it wasn't necessarily the same qualities that Thor had to show originally. Because, remember, Thor had been trying to earn the hammer for years before he finally did. So he was training to do this. Jane obviously wasn't. The hammer called to her and she picked it up and she became Thor. And she didn't have to earn it through, deeds of valor or selflessness or sacrifice, other than what she did as a doctor, of course, which are acts of heroism in themselves. And the fact that she was also battling cancer. That was a part, I remember the lead up to the movie, they were very coy about whether she was going to have the cancer or not. But in the comics, it was revealed shortly before she picked up the hammer that she was suffering from cancer. And she told Thor this, and it was a very poignant scene of her telling him this. And of course, he goes in, we have to do this, we have to get the best doctors, we have to take you to Asgard, we have to work our magic mojo on you, our alien stuff on you. And she says, no, I'm a human being. This is a human disease. I want to suffer it and have it treated like a human being. I know what comes from using miraculous treatments. They never come without a cost, etc., etc. So when she becomes Thor, there's this underlying question of why, or what in particular makes her worthy. Because some other people have asked online is, we get that, you need this tremendous, heroism and selflessness to be worthy, and very few are, besides Thor. Captain America's lifted the hammer. But, there's certainly lots of heroes in the Marvel Universe. How come none of the rest of them are worthy? Nothing against Jane, but why is Jane part of this very elite group? It's basically Thor, Captain America, a couple other people, and Jane. And the closest it comes... And this is where I actually mentioned this just gender-based idea of virtue and morality, is in the closest the hammer comes, because once the hammer exposes that it's sentient and it talks to Jane, it just praises her heart, a heart in terms of character, not. And so I have to kind of go into that a little bit, and I say that's, that can be read as a little soft. Are they kind of seeding this, Thor has to be courageous and endure sacrifice and be brave and strong, and Jane just has to have heart? And that seems a little, lopsided. Even if you accept that the hammer can choose different qualities in each person to make them worthy, the fact that it chooses such disparate qualities in Thor, him, and her to emphasize, and I kind of bring up Carol, I don't go into it a lot, but I bring up Carol Gilligan and the idea that she developed that, and I'm not by no means an expert in this, but the idea that morality may work differently according to gender. And whether this is biological, whether this is social, combination of the two, just the idea that if you accept that women are more compassionate, women are more empathetic than men, that kind of thing, where she considers, she kind of takes this, accepts these differences, and then explores whether they're, like I said, biological or social. The same thing we could say with gender in general.
Mark, for what it's worth, if I ever saw Thor's hammer and I picked it up, it would only be because of my heart, not because of my strength, courage, or brains. I don't know if that makes things any difference, because I really do have a good heart. It's just the brains and everything else doesn't work together with
Georgetown law, right there.
Just for what it's worth, yeah, right there. Just one for Jane. That's, if I can pick up Thor's hammer because of my heart, oh my God,
Rudy, I think if you were a superhero, it would be like while you're the superhero, you've got your hair, and then when you're doing your everyday life, you've got a hat on, and like people, it's unrecognizable. As was the Superman and Clark Kent with the glasses.
Yeah.
You're the hat.
I look completely different with glasses on versus glasses off. I actually call myself Clark Kent sometimes, and people just laugh right in my face. So yes.
No,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'll go back to being quiet and dumb.
I'm wondering, wait, how many film versions of Thor have there been? Because I know that there's recent ones. I mean, I'm wondering if we can wrap it up with the same way we wrapped up with the Batman one. It was like, Mark, what's your favorite person who has played Thor, who has done it well? But I don't know if there's as many versions
it's just. I mean, there was a Thor in, I think it was a TV movie of The Incredible Hulk back with Bill Bixby. I think there was a Thor in one episode, or maybe a made-for-TV movie. I can't remember who played him. It may have been Rudy. I don't know.
Mark, come on. I know. Say it. Don't skip it. It was a great movie.
Adventures in Babysitting.
The 1980s, starring Elizabeth Shue.
You didn't let me get to there. You didn't let me get there.
Yeah, I did. I got scared there for a second.
Yeah,
Mark.
that wasn't a Marvel production, but yes, there's a Thor in Adventures in Babysitting. But I mean, in the modern Marvel universe, it's just been Chris Hemsworth and now Natalie Portman.
And how do you think Chris Hemsworth did?
I think he's great. The fact that he's been able to, handle the different moods, I think, that the writers and the directors give Thor. I mean, the 4 movies have been so different in tone, and Hemsworth has to play a variety of tones within each movie, too. The first one was kind of middle of the road, and he had to do the humor and the tragedy. And then the second film, The Dark World, was much darker, as the title implies. The humor was harder to bring out. And then the third movie brought a lot of, Ragnarok brought a lot of the humor back. And then the fourth movie, I think, was just over the top with the humor. And so, I mean, he's done great. I think perhaps he had a little easier job than Chris Evans did, because, I mean, even people who weren't experts in Captain America had an idea what Captain America should sound like and should act like. And Thor, I think there was less of a template in the, kind of average moviegoer's mind. I mean, certainly comics fans had a way they wanted him to sound. I was going to say Iron Man, but I'm not sure what the public consciousness of Tony Stark was before Robert Downey Jr. started playing him. But I know a lot of people think that the comics portrayal, the writers of the Iron Man comics adopted a lot of Robert Downey Jr.'s mannerisms after the movies hit it off so big. I don't see that myself. I just think he nailed the character so well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mark, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be promoting your book, and I'm so grateful that you come on for a third time.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you both.
And keep doing it, because we need you on
Mark,
the show.
you got a great sense of humor for putting up with us.
Really.
I'm always happy to come on the show.
Yay! All right. We're going to have to do more Captain American stuff. Captain America stuff, not Captain American. Captain America.
Thank you. Always happy to be here.
Take care, Mark.
Goodies in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn Dolske and Rudy Salo. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts and you're enjoying the show, please scroll down to the bottom and hit that 5-star review, or leave a rating, or do the hashtag Rudy is Thor. What was it again? I'll have to remember. Check out our show notes to get all of Mark D. White's books, check out his blog, and also check out the show notes for your discount, 20% for Magic Mind. It won't disappoint. Details 14. You'll love it. Well, let me know what you think. And if you want to get in touch, goodisinthedetailspod@gmail.com, or you can check us out on Instagram, goodisinthedetailspod. Take a screenshot of your favorite show and tag us. If you'd like to support the pod and get extra content, I know you want the extra content, I know you want book club, go to patreon.com/goodisinthedetails. Okay, until next time, bye.